Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen, and also welcome to another episode of Reading the Room, a literary podcast featuring author interviews and discussions with bookish content creators, usually. Today, I have a solo pod for you. I wanted to do a 2023 podcast plans episode, just myself, give you some insight into what I'm doing with the podcast, what I'm hoping for this year, sort of manifest some things, and let you know what to look forward to, and also get your feedback. I would really appreciate if you send me an email, a DM, or just left a comment with any feedback on the questions that I present in this video. I would really appreciate it. If you're listening as well, I will leave my information in the episode notes if you'd like to reach out to me and give me some feedback on the pod. I also recently passed 6,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is incredible. I kind of can't believe it, to be honest. I've seen some kind of good growth in the last 2 months on my channel for some reason. I think with like the best of videos, it was really a push that got me over 6K. But so I also wanted to do a Q&A for this video and podcast episode. And so that'll be coming at the end of the video. Just some kind of fun questions, some kind of deep questions as well. But anyways, to start off, let's talk about 2023 podcast plans. Me being online with books on the internet, hence being online, I really learned that I really enjoy discussions with people. I started doing book content online with Instagram. I was reviewing books on there, but I was really missing that discussion aspect of having back and forth conversations live with people and also being like verbal about my thoughts about books and just being able to kind of go stream of consciousness about what I think about books. I felt the review format to be very limiting. And so then I started BookTube. But then from there, I was like, well, I still want to talk to people about books. And I'm not really getting that with talking to a camera. And so from there, I had a couple of collabs with friends, and then I wanted to start interviewing authors as a way of me trying to figure out what I like about literary fiction, why I'm so drawn to fiction and novels as a form. And I figured the best way to do that is maybe to start talking to people that are creating my favorite books. And so I started with Julia May Jonas, author of Vladimir, then Lauren Euler, author of Fake Accounts. And from there, I was like, this is the most exciting and just most invigorated and passionate I've felt about something in a long time. And so I formalized it into this podcast. And this year, I have never felt like the most girl boss about something in a long time. I haven't really felt this, I don't know, like passionate or like hungry for something to grow before. Like I've wanted to, do well on BookTube. I never really wanted to be like a huge booktuber by any means. But for the podcast, I really want this to be, I feel like this is going to sound stupid or like, I don't even know what I'm saying, but I want it to be a podcast that people, readers of literary fiction, know like, oh yeah, I heard that interview on Reading the Room. Like, have you listened to this episode? Or a constant recommendation for people is Reading the Room as like a go-to author interview, discussion, chatty podcast about literary fiction. That's like my ultimate goal. I want to get it in as many people's ears as possible. And so this is going into my plans for the year. I really hope to upload weekly videos. Recently, I kind of had some reflection on whether I can sustain that with my job. I'm a lawyer, and then also putting out weekly episodes. Did I have enough content to fill that? How much of that do I want to be author interviews versus just discussions? And so I've decided that I'm going to attempt doing a weekly podcast upload on every Tuesday. So hopefully for the foreseeable future, you'll be able to listen to Reading the Room or watch it on YouTube. That is the plan right now. And then also in terms of types of podcasts, as I mentioned, I was considering how many author interviews can I do? How much can I sustain with reading the books, organizing them, and just not burning out. And so my plan is to do roughly half author interviews and half chatty discussions to sort of lend some levity and just some casual vibes to the podcast as well. And I was going to do like a every other week kind of go back and forth between author interview and also a chatty discussion. But I think I'm just kind of let it go where it goes. Maybe you'll get 2 or 3 author interviews in a row, then 2 or 3 chatty discussions. Maybe I'll go back and forth. I'm not really sure about that, but you can expect a mix of content on this podcast going forward. That is for sure. And then also, this is a question for you all in terms of content that you enjoy. One easy way of filling in a podcast episode is with a book club. So I've had a couple of live streams on my channel that have done really well and people have been really engaged in it. And I would love to keep doing that as like a live stream at the end of the month on my channel and then upload the audio to podcast platforms as well after the live. If anyone cares to just listen to it and not engage in the live stream, totally cool. But I don't want to do it unless people actually want to like do a book club. I know there's so many out there. There's a lot of offerings, and I know it's a big ask of adding a book to your TBR just to, I don't know, engage with my podcast. So if you don't want a book club, totally get it. But if you enjoy it and want to look forward to like a monthly Reading the Room pick every month, I'm happy to do it. Very informal. I'll have a guest on. We'll live stream chat about it. You can come on the YouTube channel, comment as we're talking about it, or you can just listen to it afterwards. So that's one idea for content as well. If you like the book club, no hard feelings if you don't. Just wanted to put that out there. And then also, if there's any specific like topics for discussion you would like to see, please let me know as well. Like, do you want an audiobook episode, another episode about like book covers with CJ, for example, something about book buying habits, episodes on specific authors with a guest as well would be really fun, like maybe diving into Rachel Cusk or something. That's just an idea that I had. If you have anything specific that you'd like to see, please let me know, and it'll definitely be considered for future content as well. But then aside from that, I guess the last sort of goal or manifestation thing that's going on with me in the podcast is I feel this really interesting excitement about this project because I want to monetize it. I want it to like be a thing that I do on the side and hopefully, get some money from it. That'd be incredible. That's not really why I'm doing this, but it would be a really great way of doing that. Currently I have a Patreon in which there are 2 support tiers. One is $3, one is $5. That's also linked below in the episode notes or in the description below. And if you like Reading the Room and want to support me in this endeavor, it would mean the world to me if you donated that way. But also I've been thinking about like how to get ads, what that means, how to make it a monetized podcast. And I'm just not really familiar with that process or what that would look like for me. It's just a general like goal idea that I have. But if anyone out there is in the podcast world or has any ideas about how I can maybe go about doing that, that'd be incredibly helpful as well. And to kind of go into the Q&A section of this too, and to kind of bridge that gap with monetization and thinking about what this podcast means for me long term, over the new year and over Christmas, I've been thinking about what I'm doing with this. Like, what am I trying to do with this? Like, what am I trying to gain from it, I guess? And I purely just love the discussions. I love being able to be further engaged as a reader and thinking about books in a different way when I'm preparing for an interview, for example. It's been really beneficial to me just intellectually, I would say. But also, I have this weird manifestation thing going on where I'm hoping that something will come of this, if that makes sense. I don't know if it's like a career-wise thing or like whether it just becomes like a monetized podcast that does really well and it's just like a side thing that I do while maintaining my current profession. I think what I'm saying is I love this idea of being able to naturally network in publishing, and I've already met so many people and so many kind authors who have been so supportive of the podcast and just really nice. And I don't know, what am I saying? I guess I'm just saying that I have a good feeling about this, and anyone that listens or watches or shares an episode like in their Instagram stories or with a friend, any of that support means the world to me. So I wanted to say thank you to anyone who's shown excitement for Reading the Room. Sometimes it feels like I'm shouting into the void or being overly self-indulgent with this. So like whenever someone sends me a picture of them like listening to Reading the Room, I want to cry because it takes so much work and it's such like I don't know, it's really kind of scary being a little bit like vulnerable or like trying to have an intellectual conversation with authors who I am so like who I admire so much. It's like, what am I doing? Like, how am I interviewing these people? They're taking an hour out of their day to talk to me about their work. And I take it so seriously. And so anyways, thank you so much for supporting. Any way that you choose to support this year means the world to me. And yeah, I don't know. I guess last thing there, if you have any ideas for how to make this baby grow, please let me know. Podcasts are a very oversaturated market, which I totally understand. And so I don't really know. Sometimes I feel kind of delusional with like my hopes for this thing, but then at the same time, I'm like, no, Jalen, you're doing pretty damn good. You got your favorite author on last year, which you did not expect, meaning Otessa Moshfegh, and so many other authors that I love as well, but she's like my queen. So that was just like, I don't know. I still can't believe that. But anyways, that is my podcast plans. To summarize really quick, a mix of author interviews and chatty discussions, maybe a book club. Please let me know any ideas that you have for the podcast in terms of topics, ways to monetize or like grow it. I don't know if anyone out there is a podcast person, but that is that. So let's get into the 6K Q&A now. These are in no order at all, but these are really fun questions. So I'm just going to go off the cuff. I haven't really planned my answers to these, so we'll see. So the first question is favorite publisher, and not to give, I guess, a big publisher as like my favorite. I would love to shout some indie presses as well. I would say that my favorite publisher is FSG. They are the publisher that I always look to frequently for their new releases. I tend to find the most books that I like from FSG as a literary fiction, for the most part, imprint. And so that is my favorite publisher, I would say. But I also really like some indie presses, including $2 Radio is really great. Clash Books publishes a lot of really interesting like indie horror, which I love as well. Question number 2. You're let loose in a bookshop. No budget. What is the game plan? That is an overwhelming question because I would probably just buy the bookstore, everything, and just move in, probably is what I would do. But seriously, if I was let loose, no budget, I would probably try to find some more, I don't know, interesting books as objects, I guess, more like collector's editions or books that are more expensive, I guess, going to the budget aspect of this, books that I wouldn't normally treat myself to, go hard on some graphic novels that are more expensive maybe. So yeah, I think that would be it. I would try to go for the books that I wouldn't normally treat myself to. Question number 3, my desert island book. If I'm gonna go for like a long book that would sustain me as like a single object for a long time that I've read, I would probably go with Middlemarch by George Eliot. I feel like I could read that book 10 times and get many things new out of it every time. But aside from that, if I wanted something like new that I think is going to slap, that I want to read soon, that I would take to an island, it would be like Marcel Proust maybe, In Search of Lost Time, and just read all of those, or like Knausgaard's My Struggle, have many books in one, you know what I mean? Kind of cheating the question there, but something that would keep me occupied for a long time would be the answer. This is probably the biggest question that I've been thinking a ton about, so I'm very excited to sort of explore it here. Next question is, how has your author interview series changed your reading and outlook on reading? This is something that I think about a lot in terms of both the preparing for interviews, trying to figure out who I want to reach out to come on the podcast, being very intentional because there's only so much time and so many books I can read purely for this project. So it's been a lot of really big self-reflection on what I like to read, what do I want to showcase on here, like what conversations will be invigorating for me, so then it'll be a good final product for you all to listen to. So I try to pick books and authors that are doing something particularly focused to like my interest, or something that I think is really interesting formally, something that makes me, when I'm reading it, I want to ask the author questions, if that makes sense. So that's one aspect of that in terms of how it's changed my reading or outlook on reading. But aside from that, just from like a critical thinking perspective, I really love, and it's a little bit of a challenge as well, when I'm reading a book that I know the author's coming on the podcast, it changes my perception of the book a little bit, because I'm constantly like on the lookout for questions or things or interesting things to like pick out during a discussion. And it's not just like a relaxed, like just enjoying the story for the story, if that makes sense. I always try to like lean in critically to what I'm reading, but with author interviews, you kind of have to take the experience as you're reading it to really lend itself to a good product, which is an interesting sort of like homework style way of reading. But the fact that I love it makes it not feel like a chore. But it's also incredibly exciting because these are authors that I'm really excited to talk to. So it's also like I'm reading with like vigor, and I'm like very excited to find little nuggets that I can try to pick out and make it an interesting conversation. Just learning from an author's perspective really helps me when it comes to book reviewing as well. I tend to find that some content online with book reviewing generally can be very like dismissive of the craft process of books, and I try to do every book justice in terms of me really considering what it's doing formally and also in terms of its content, kind of blending those two things in my reviews or coverage on my channel and on the podcast. When you're constantly thinking about what an author's doing while crafting a book, and then also knowing you're going to talk to them, it adds a different level of like care that you approach with reading, I find, where you're really considering like a person has sat at this desk and has taken this length of time to write this book. And it just, I don't know, I guess it makes me more optimistic while I'm reading and more open-minded, I guess, in terms of what is going on the page. And before I just kind of assume something about the book, really considering why I'm thinking that or what personal biases I'm bringing to the book, those kind of questions kind of come in more. Yeah, so it's a very high-level answer to that question. I've been thinking about this a lot and how it's going to impact my reading for the better and for the worse a little bit, in terms of me not just being a reader now at all times. Like with certain books, I'm constantly thinking like, do I want this? Should I ask this author to come on the podcast? Will they come on? And then I start thinking about like questions, and it requires a different level of like, I don't know, involvement. Anyways, that was a long answer to that question, but thank you for submitting that, because that was a really interesting one for me to think through. Next question is merch collab with Sunny's. I would love to. I don't know what that would look like. Sunny's is Sunny's Book Truck. My friend CJ, who's also a booktuber, she has her own business and she sells this incredible merch that is just so good, and I have many pieces of it, not around me, but yeah, would you guys be interested in like merch from me? I don't know. Since it's like a podcast only, it feels like too indulgent at this time, but of course I would love to like have a shirt with the Reading the Room art on it, or like something interesting. I just don't know if I'm big enough for that yet, but I'm definitely down for it. Okay, next question. How do you prepare for an interview? This changes all the time. It really depends on the book too, but I'm a big annotator now. I do a lot of annotating. I have a Kindle Scribe, which helps me a lot with highlighting and then writing questions as I come up with them as I'm reading. And then aside from that, I use this app called Notion, which I've been using for organizing my scheduling of the podcast. And then also for each book, I can put all my notes in Notion for it so that when it comes to interview time, I'm going to have them like to the left of my screen and kind of have it all organized in one place. So basically, I annotate the hell out of books. If I think of a question, I run to my phone or I write it down somewhere. And then the nights before an interview, mostly the night before the interview, I sit down and I organize all of my notes and my questions and review it and make sure that I have like a good sort of streamlined, planned out discussion. But I also sort of just try to let the conversation go where it goes. And so that's it. Basically, I annotate, highlight quotes that I think are interesting, write down my questions, organize them in a way that makes sense. And I also watch a lot of author interviews. So that's what made me want to do this in the first place, was I was watching a lot of author interviews generally. And I was like, maybe I could do that too, because I love watching them and I want to be involved and like ask questions myself. And so I also watch a lot of other existing interviews out there with authors to make sure I'm not repeating other things that have been talked about significantly, which can be really hard. And I think that's probably the hardest part about interviewing authors, is trying to think of original content or original questions. And sometimes it feels sort of impossible because many authors have been asked many questions already. So it can be really tough sometimes, but it's much easier, I would say, for books, for like debut novels, I would say, or if I have an author coming on well in advance of a pub day and there are no existing interviews about it. I love that because I don't feel limited by what's already out there, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's how I prepare for the most part. Next question, what's your most recommended book to people in real life? So I don't really know a lot of people that read in real life, so I feel like most of my conversations are online, but I think I have two books that I would recommend the most typically in conversation. The first one being The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I read this, I think, over 3 years ago, but that one, in terms of its importance as a story and also just its surprises and the plot twists and the characters, I think it's a perfect book for anyone, basically. So I feel like that's a good one. That's one that I always go to. It's also kind of short too, so I feel like it fits any sort of style of reader. So The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. And then aside from that, I always recommend Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen because I'm a Franzen stan. But I think it's my favorite depiction of a family saga that I've ever read. And so I feel like there's something in that book for everyone as well. And also I find most people will enjoy a family drama. There's enough juiciness there, but also a lot of just gorgeous writing on the sentence level that I find most people tend to love that book. And so I've had good success recommending it. So yeah, those two I would say. And then lastly, I wouldn't recommend this book to everyone, I guess, but it's probably the book that I've recommended the most in my life. I want to say, at least like in my internet life. It's Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler as well. Fake Accounts is one of my favorite books of all time. And so whenever someone asks for a book recommendation, I'm like, this is my favorite book, so maybe you'll love it too. Or one of my favorite books. But next question, what are some of your favorite movies? And I don't watch a lot of movies these days, but I would say two answers that came to mind immediately are the Scream series and then Clue, the movie. I love those movies. I think it's really interesting how I'm more drawn to like horror and thriller style content in a movie form versus in books. I don't really tend to read thrillers all that often, sometimes horror, but yeah, it's interesting how like in a literary form or in a novel form, I tend to want something more dramatic or more intellectually rigorous, but like on screen, I like to watch Drag Race and Scream, which I don't know what that means about me. I think it's just maybe the form or just the brevity of the time spent with that content is different. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to me. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. But next question, if you could interview any author no longer living, who would it be? And for me, I don't really read a lot of backlist books, so I don't really have like off the top of my head an author that screams out to me. But I would say one book that I read last year that I really wanted to interview the author of was Iris Murdoch, author of A Severed Head. I loved that book. It was so weird and dramatic and messy and romantic and like just so odd that I would love to get into her brain and figure out like what's going on up there. I need to read more of her books too to be able to have an intelligent hypothetical conversation with her, but that's just one that I was like, damn, I would love to see what's going on with Iris Murdoch, but that's just one initial answer. Next question, how do you go about reaching out to authors to be on the pod? This one, I either email them directly if their email is available online, or I DM them on Instagram if they're on Instagram, or I reach out to their publicist. Those are like the three ways I do it. I've had the most success reaching out directly. I tend to find that like DMs and emails work the best, just giving a general pitch of the podcast and why I'm interested in having them on, but also reaching out to publicists has been really great too. So those are like the three main ways. Next question, do I have any travel plans for the new year? At this time, I don't really. I have 2 older dogs, and they're sort of at that really unfortunate time of being kind of close to end of life, I want to say. They're doing all right. No worries there, but I'm a little hesitant to plan any travel that's with both myself and my partner, because it's a huge ask having like my parents watch them, for example. So we haven't really planned anything just because we don't really know what's going on with that. So it's just been a weird time of like being home, but it's been good. And so right now I don't have any travel plans except for work. I have a couple trips planned, but I really am itching to travel like really, really badly. So I'm hoping to get somewhere tropical later in the year, maybe, if I'm able to. Someone asked if I'm still looking to change into a more book-related career. Long term, yeah, totally. This is my favorite thing in the world, is reading, like most that are watching this or listening to this, and I would love to somehow work closer to books in my career. I just don't know at this time what that looks like, and I'm comfortable in my job. I don't have any like pressing plans to make that move, but I'm hoping through all of this stuff that something will like come out of it. I don't know what that means, but networking and just kind of manifesting that through putting myself online and people hopefully knowing who I am will kind of lead to something that makes sense. So yeah, that is a goal of mine. I just don't know what it is at this time. Next question, an author I would like to invite on the podcast this year. I would say I have two authors that I like desperately are huge. Like I need them to come on at some point that I'm really hoping for. One is Sheila Heti and the other is Jonathan Franzen. Those are like my 2 huge goals for this year or next, anytime in the future. I would love to get them on. So fingers crossed that I'm able to do that at some point in my life, but I'm going to be bawling my eyes out if that ever happens. So let's hope. What's a book that you'd like to see adapted into a movie or show? So for this question, I tend to find that I don't feel the need for books that I love to be adapted. Like I don't often have that response, like, oh, I wish this was on the screen. You know what I mean? Even like when Normal People was adapted, I was like, this does not need to be a show. And that's probably a hot take, but everything I loved about that book in terms of its telling and her prose style, like none of it really felt like I needed to see it on screen. I did not feel that need, if that makes sense. But I think aside from that, a book that I would like to see adapted, if I had to choose something, I would love to see an adaptation of Bunny by Mona Awad. That'd be really fun and kind of more leaning into like my horror love, which I love to see on screen. And then one that is already being adapted or has been adapted is Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. I think that'll be really interesting and really good. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I know it just premiered at Sundance, I think a couple days ago. So that's coming soon, and I'm excited for that, for sure. Next question, how do you have time to read so much? This one is, I have to think about the opportunity cost, basically. And so I don't watch much TV. I don't watch many movies. So every night, basically after dinner, I usually watch like a show with my partner. We usually watch Jeopardy or on Fridays, Drag Race. And then after that, we hang out for a little bit, clean, and then I go into my office here in this chair and I read. Or I try to if I'm not like doom scrolling on TikTok or something, which has been kind of bad lately. But yeah, so every night I just make it a priority to read for at least like an hour. And I also do audiobooks, like in my free time, if I'm doing chores and stuff, I try to always have an audiobook going. So I'm constantly, reading stuff. So that's what I try to do. I try to make it a priority. And that's how I do it, is cutting out movies and TV, which sucks, but I prefer the books, baby, Next question is favorite books as a kid. And I loved, namely, a few things. R.L. Stine, like Fear Street was my shit. Goosebumps, loved. I also really love Stephen King. I remember being, I think it was like in 5th or 6th grade, I was at like Fry's or something, and I asked my mom to buy me a copy of Cell by Stephen King, his like zombie book, and I remember bringing it to school. I've always been that kid that like brought a book to school and like had it on my desk with me for like breaks and stuff. But I was reading that at a much too young age, I will say. So I love Stephen King. I loved R.L. Stine. Those are like the 2 authors that I was like obsessed with. I loved horror novels. I also loved like Magic Treehouse books. Those are my favorite, I would say, for a while, like in elementary school. So yeah, I was a big horror reader. Like, that was like my gateway into reading, was through lots of like teen slasher novels, I would say. Okay, 2 more questions I have here. Next one is, which character from one of your favorite books would be your bestie and your enemy? I think my bestie would be the narrator of Motherhood by Sheila Heti, maybe. Yeah, I feel like when I read that book, I felt very called out. I felt very attacked at all times. And I would like to talk to the narrator of motherhood, if that makes sense. I feel like we think similarly, so I feel like we might get along, if that makes sense. We can spiral together, you know? And then an enemy, who would be my enemy? That's an interesting question. I guess my enemy would be like Lord William from Latvona, maybe. I'm trying to think of like the most despicable person I can think of in a book. And he jumps out instantly. So I guess William. Yeah. Okay, last question. I love this question. If you were forced at knife point to write a novel, what is the protagonist, situation, style, go? And for this question, I think I have to say it would be, the protagonist would be a queer 20-something lawyer who loves to read, probably. Situation would be him thinking on the page about his attraction to the novel, what he can explore in a novel, what is the plot of his novel going to be, trying to figure out how to add those stakes on the page. And the style would be hopefully self-aware, meta in its tone and its telling in some way, have some sort of like horror leaning element to it, all in a blender. Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds like it could be a terrible novel or it could be good, but some of my favorite novels kind of do something like that, and I feel like I could do something kind of fun, maybe. In my head I can. So yeah, that's my novel. That won't probably ever happen, but all right. Anyways, that about does it for this episode. Please let me know again if you have any feedback on the podcast, hopefully positive or just constructive in a good way. Any tips or tricks for making a podcast grow, I'm all ears. Also, any ideas you have, and if you have any questions, let me know as well. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I'm really excited for this year. And just to give you a quick hint, next week, Billy Ray Belcourt, author of A Minor Chorus, coming on the podcast. I am so nervous for the conversation, telling you all. Hopefully it goes well, but he is so smart. That book is so smart, kind of doing what I would want a novel that I could potentially write to do in a way. So yeah, wish me luck for that, and I will catch you all in the next one. Bye.